Hi everyone, I'm Iftach Schulman, co-founder and CTO at Redis Labs, and I'm happy to host Vijay, Senior Engineer Manager at Freshworks, to discuss how Freshworks scaled using Redis Enterprise Cloud. But let me start with a short overview why modern application needs real-time data as a key needs for the app. Now, typically, if you look at, if you have noticed, when you develop a real-time application, you need to make sure that the end-to-end response time from the time the user click the button until you get the first byte of the response is around 100 milliseconds. Now, usually, you can divide this time by 50% or 50 millisecond network time and 50 millisecond data center time. Inside the data centers, usually for every user request, there are multiple interactions between the application server and the database server. Now, in order to be able to confirm to 50 milliseconds inside the data center, you need your database to respond in no time. That means less than a millisecond. And today, there is only one database that can do that, and this is Redis. And this is the reason, practically, why Redis has become so popular in the recent year. If you look at the figure on the left, you can see that every single day, there are approximately 6 million launches of Redis just in Docker Hub, more than MongoDB, MySQL, and Elasticsearch together. In the figure in the middle, you can see that Redis was surveyed by Sumo Logic as the most used database on AWS, more than MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, and a bunch of other popular data services on AWS. And on the right, for the fourth year in a row, Redis was selected as the most loved database among Stack Overflow developers. Redis Enterprise, as it sounds, is the enterprise version of Redis. It has been in production since early 2013, manages over 1 million databases. Since then, we have almost 10,000 node failure events, hundreds of complete data center outages, and for those users who enabled all the HA, data persistent, and backup capabilities of Redis Enterprise, we didn't lose a single byte of data. Built by the team who made the open source Redis, Redis Enterprise is designed to provide 5 nines availability at any scale, any data model, anywhere. Cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and on-premises. And this is why almost 8,000 customers are choosing to use Redis Enterprise for the real-time use cases. Among them, 50% of the Fortune 10 and 30% of the Fortune 100 across almost any verticals. Ad tech, tech companies, clean tech, financial services, healthcare, and life science. We built Redis Enterprise to ease the work of the DevOps teams. Redis Enterprise Cloud is a fully managed Redis as a service designed over serverless concept. That means DevOps don't see nodes and cluster. The only things that they need to do is to specify the memory limit and the amount of throughput that they want to achieve. And from that moment on, Redis Enterprise Cloud take control of everything. Provisioning the underlying infrastructure, provisioning the shard configuration, and if needed, reshard and rebalance the Redis shard across the cloud infrastructure. In a recent benchmark that we did just a year ago, we demonstrated that Redis Enterprise can reach over 200 million operations per second while keeping latency under sub-millisecond. And we did it with only 40 AWS instances. Moreover, every instance or every node in this cluster was managed to do something like 5 million operations per second, no matter what the size of the cluster is. That means completely linear scaling. And Redis Enterprise not only allows you to do this hyperscale, high throughput databases, but it also very attractive in terms of TCO, because you cannot imagine any other database that can reach to this level of scale with just 40 AWS instances. Talking about TCO, more and more of our customers have started to put very large data set on the top of Redis. And I'm talking about hundreds of terabytes and close to petabyte use cases. This is why we develop our Redis on Flash technology. Redis on Flash allows you to extend DRAM with SSD, but maintaining the sub-millisecond latency of Redis. And with Redis on Flash technology, you can save over 70% of your infrastructure cost versus other cloud provider Redis services, open source Redis, and even other disk-based NoSQL databases. Furthermore, we found that a lot of our customers are using Redis not only for very high volume, high throughput use cases, but also with multiple small databases for development and testing, and also for microservices use cases. Using our built-in multi-tenancy architecture, we can show that Redis Enterprise can be significantly cheaper in terms of infrastructure cost from any cloud provider, as well as with do-it-yourself Redis running over managed Kubernetes infrastructure like EKS, JKE, or AKS. It is also important to note that when you look at deploying a cloud service, you would like to reach to as much as possible uptime. And usually the industry standard is to be able to do 5.9 uptimes in any mission-critical application, for every mission-critical application. The problem with existing cloud architecture is that even if you enable multi-AZ configuration in a region, you can never achieve more than 4 nines availability. So the only way to overcome this is to provide multi-region deployment. There are 2 ways to do multi-region deployment. The first, which is most of the other databases are using, active-passive deployment. But active-passive deployment has multiple limitations. For instance, you can read from every replica, but you can write to only one replica. Furthermore, when something bad happens and you want to do failover, it can take you a while, and in many cases, you can lose your entire data. And this is exactly why we developed active-active Redis. Built on academically proven CRDT technology, we allow any existing Redis application to work with active-active Redis, like if it were a standard Redis. Allow read and write application for every replica across the globes with completely transparent conflict-free resolution while maintaining the sub-millisecond of Redis. CRDTs allow us to do that because it designed over conflict-free mechanisms. That means whenever you write to a replica, you don't need to wait to this replica to propagate your write across the other replicas. And this is how powerful is CRDT technology with active-active Redis. But CRDT's Redis allows you to do many more things. For instance, traditionally, when you select your cloud, you usually decide to go with one application per cloud. Now, with active-active Redis, each one of your application can practically be deployed in a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud deployment without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. And again, keeping the Redis sub-milli latency. Active-active Redis also allows you to smoothly migrate between one cloud to another or between hybrid cloud on-premises to the cloud. Active-active Redis allows you to do it without a single cutoff, an event that most of the people don't want to deal with, because usually when you move from one cloud to another or from your on-premises to the cloud, This is a very sensitive operation, and you can create a lot of mistakes in the middle. So with active technology, you can decide whenever you want to do the transition, and if you fail to do the transition, you can revert back without worrying about the data migrations. And today, I am happy to say that Redis Enterprise Cloud is also available on AWS Outpost. AWS Outpost will be presented in your Redis Enterprise Cloud console like in other regions. And you can easily run your existing application, on-prem application, on AWS Outpost and manage everything from a single console. Moreover, the fact that we are using built-in multi-tenancy architecture means that whenever you provision a new Redis database, you don't need to worry about provisioning more VMs on your Outpost configuration. Practically 3 VMs can actually host like 100 Redis databases without you worrying about extra capacity of Outpost. So this is very, very attractive for more and more users of us. We also built Redis Enterprise for the mindset of developers. If you look at this figure taken from dbengine.com, you can see that the trend for data modeling have changed during the last 10 years. Graph, document, time series, key value, and search are rising, versus relational database stays flat and even decline, especially for real-time use cases. And this is why we allowed all these new data models in Redis, bringing to the market with a source available license. These engines are built on the Redis architectures, that mean everything is served in memory with a dedicated engines, and practically outperform any other similar technologies by 1 to 2 orders of magnitudes. We recently also introduced Redis Gears, which is a programmable engine that runs inside Redis and allows you to control any data flow and trigger that you want inside Redis while keeping latency under sub-millisecond. We built Redis Enterprise with a very strong vision to where serving real-time in the coming year. And today I'm happy to share this vision with decision makers and thought leaders like CTO and CIOs. Many of our customers are using Redis today as an enhanced caching system and even as a real-time database. They do that because they can maintain sub-millisecond latency across almost any use case, with 5 nines availability and multi-region, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud deployment, with attractive TCO that allows them to host any dataset or any throughput on Redis Enterprise. With the new data models that we have developed, like JSON, stream, time series, graph, and Bloom filter, we actually extend Redis to a real-time data platform. And with Redis Gears, you can practically manipulate or control any data flows that you like inside this data platform while maintaining the sub-millisecond latency of Redis. But we don't stop here. We recently introduced a lot of AI capabilities inside Redis Enterprise. So for instance, you can do forecast over Redis time series, and you can rank your searches according to AI algorithm. But even more fascinating, we recently introduced Redis AI. Redis AI is an real-time inferencing engine that runs inside Redis, closer to where your data lives. And by doing so, we actually break any limitation related to AI inferencing, which means how you can inference your data, your existing stack with AI, without hurting the performance of your application. And finally, there is no other better way to complete my session with introducing again Vijay, Senior Manager at Freshworks, to explain how Freshworks uses Redis Enterprise Cloud to scale the business on AWS. Vijay, welcome.
Thank you, Iftak. That was really good and informative. So I'll start with our presentation. So I'm Vijay Lakshmi Narayanan. I'm a senior engineering manager at Freshworks. And today I'll be walking you through how Freshworks chose Redis Enterprise, how we moved from self-hosting Redis and open source Redis, and then we moved to Redis Enterprise. And that's what I'll be covering today. In that, I am hoping that viewers will get some information about how to choose software, how we chose it, right? So before that, a few words about Freshworks itself. So we are a SaaS company that was founded in 2010. We were originally founded as a single product help desk company, and at this time we are a multi-product suite. We see ourselves primarily as a company that provides your business with world-class business software. At this time, we are a certified unicorn valued at upwards of $3 billion. So a little more about us. We have currently around 220 odd customers, and we are available on all continents. We have customers on all continents except one, and we have 13 offices globally. Most of our development happens in India. And so this is today's agenda. We'll, first I'll speak a little about how we choose software, and then our path, Freshworks' path to Redis Enterprise. And I'm not going to cover too many of our use cases on Redis because frankly there is just too many. But I will briefly talk about one of the softwares that I had a hand in, that is our API gateway. And at this time it serves it takes about 320 million requests in a day, and it serves them at less than 2 milliseconds of latency. That's the P99 latency is less than 2 milliseconds, and that would not have been possible without Redis Enterprise. So, when deciding which software to use, you typically just want to answer the question, will this software serve my customers' needs, right? And it's typically just a question of pragmatics. Will this work? Will this not work? So, in fact, all the software that's listed on this slide is software that we at Freshworks use, right? But at the same time, as an engineer, you want to get the most bang for your buck. So, here's a very simple model, right? And I stress on the simple. But, if your software costs X dollars and your software gives you a return of Y, what you want is to maximize the Y over X. So now to get the maximum value, you can increase the Y or you can decrease the X. Now, increasing the Y typically depends on your sales teams. So, and since we're mostly engineers, I'm not going to talk about Y. We'll talk a little about X. Okay, so we want to use the most economical software for whatever price that you get. Right now, unintuitive as this might sound, that does not automatically mean use free software, because free software is free only in the sense of beer, right? And when you want to run engineering, the costs that are associated with your software rise very quickly when you want to give your customers the main things that they need. And the things that customers most value, the non-functional requirements outside of their regular business use case are that they want high uptime, they want availability, they as much as possible prefer fast results over slow results. So at Freshworks, we went through this process where, as I said, we started off with self-hosting Redis, and as our scale grew, the cost of maintaining our Redis cluster also grew, right? So while I wasn't at Freshworks at the time that we decided to move to Redis Enterprise, I did speak with this stakeholders within the company, and they told me that we got to around 90% of the way that you have to get to maintain your own Redis cluster. So this 90% is an important number. I'll come back to it. But as we all know, 90% is hardly enough in engineering, right? Like 90% means if you are 90% of the way, that means 10% of your customers are unhappy, and that's never a good situation. So we gradually moved out of a self-hosted Redis to Redis Enterprise. The state of our Redis usage today is as described here in this slide by our senior director, Naren Janakiraman. Right? And in our next slide, this is an indication of how popular and important Redis is in our overall architecture. Right? So rather than going into each individual use case of how we use Redis in the company, here is a sample, and I stress just a sample of how we use Redis at Freshworks. So, like I try to cover as many of diverse topics as possible. Like I think the new one, Redis. I don't think we're using Redis AI that Iftak mentioned earlier, but we are using Redis for our machine learning platform. So I think Redis is our most popular topic in most of our blogs. So one more thing, actually, I would like to highlight that last talk because I'm there. Anyway, so returning back to where we started, right? You can scale open source, but it is not easy. The costs associated with hosting and your own open source systems, not just Redis, right? Even if it's MySQL or any open source software, these go up very high, very quickly. But that same measure can also help you as a guideline for, should I use open source or should I go with the enterprise version of any software? So, like we went to 90%. Now, as an engineering manager or as an architect in your company, if you can evaluate the cost of taking your software from wherever you are, 90%, to where you want to be, 5 nines like Redis Labs, or 4 nines, depending on your use case, then based on those operational metrics, you can decide whether or not you want to use open source or the enterprise software. And that is like, this is one perhaps narrow area where the choice between open source and proprietary or commercial software comes in, which is, with commercial software, typically you cannot tweak it as much, but with open source you can. And Redis being open source, you actually have the opportunity to, go it entirely your own way, right? So that's one of the decisions that, as an individual, as a company, you have to make. And as always, the question is this serving your customers' needs? The equation that we described earlier. So with that, let's briefly talk about, the one use case that I had a hand in, right? So Girish Kaundinya, my coworker, and I presented the API gateway earlier in this January, and I encourage you to watch that talk. It's only about 15 minutes, so I won't go into the same details we went into over there, but I will just briefly discuss some of the decisions that we made that were because we use Redis Enterprise, right? So one thing that we did use for our API gateway was we chose Envoy, and we, at the time, this was around March 2018, we did an evaluation along pretty much the same lines I described earlier. That is, okay, it's open source, and does it have commercial support? It didn't at the time, but it was an API gateway. It was pretty simple, so we actually went ahead with it. And in retrospect, our choice has turned out to be a very good one, because Envoy since then has graduated into a CNCF project. It has seen huge adoption across the industry, and your software has made it when AWS offers it natively. The AWS App Mesh is built on top of Envoy. So at this time, we self-host Envoy on all our machines, and it works for us both as an edge proxy and as a sidecar. Will we go to App Mesh? At this time, I don't see it happening because we've developed sufficient expertise. But if our operational metrics demand that we go to app mesh, then yes. And if there is a commercial company that offers Envoy, perhaps that's something we will choose, right? But coming back to the rate limiter, right? What does a rate limiter need? A rate limiter needs to maintain policies for every customer. Let us say, like this example over here, I get a call, an API call for acme.freshdesk.com. I need to know, okay, this API, Acme is allowed, let's say 250 calls per minute. So I need to store this policy information in some place. And in addition to storing the policy, I must do counting, the counts that Redis offers most natively, right? Increment, an atomic counter, and expire, which is, I think, accurate to microseconds. So we need a persistent storage system and we need a counter system. And the advantage for us that we get from Redis Enterprise is that the high availability guarantees of Redis Enterprise mean we can use Redis as our persistent database itself rather than just as a cache. And because of this, because we have Redis Enterprise, that means we have a persistent system, and there's only, like, our only database is Redis Enterprise. We don't have to keep something like MySQL that stores policy information and use Redis for our caches and counting. Now, everyone knows that the reliability of your system is inversely proportional to the number of components you have. So the fewer the components you have, the higher your reliability. And highly available Redis has meant that we have one less architectural component, and that means we are that much, just even monetarily we save money, and in terms of reliability we can sleep a little better, right? So this is kind of how we use Redis right now. The question in open source is not, in modern days, is not so much open source versus the commercial version, but it's rather how do you use both. So for us, our production environment uses Redis Enterprise, our sandbox uses Redis Enterprise, and our staging also uses Redis Enterprise. That's necessary because when we are doing benchmarkings, we need true validation. However, on our dev machines, we just run open source Redis, typically from Docker, and that just gets rid of a lot of our dev problems. But we know that the behavior is going to be the same both locally and at scale. And Redis Enterprise really saves us a lot in terms of the DevOps headache, right? So I encourage you to watch our talk from January. At that time, we were talking about 35 million requests in a day, but today we get around 326 million requests in a day. And these are our numbers. And as you can see that these numbers are possible mainly, and we need these numbers because our customers need something like a real-time system. And that's pretty much it, right? Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you can see why we chose Redis Enterprise and why we continue to stay with it. Thank you.